She was a lonely millionaire, used to having everything, except for the one thing she wanted most: companionship. Until one day she received a mysterious gift, with no sender. A reborn baby so real, so perfect, it seemed alive. But what began as an attempt to fill the emptiness, soon turned into a silent nightmare. Inexplicable cries, always at 3 in the morning, strange movements, disturbing phone calls, and a bond she could never break. In this dark and gripping narrative, you will follow the journey of a woman who descended into the abyss between loneliness and madness. Do you have the courage to listen to this story all the way to the end? Then take a deep breath and get ready. Before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our dark and real stories like this one. Leave a like right now if you enjoy narratives that mess with your mind and create that suspense that keeps you hooked from start to finish. And tell us in the comments, would you have the courage to own a reborn baby after this story? Or have you ever had a strange experience with inanimate objects? I should have been suspicious. No one had sent me gifts in years, let alone something so unusual. It all started on a cold autumn morning. The doorman called to tell me there was a package for me. I went down to the lobby with little expectation. After all, who would even remember me? But there it was, a large heavy box, with a flawless red ribbon and a handwritten note. So you'll never feel alone again. There was no signature, no sender, just that note, and the box, cold, eerily cold. I brought it up to my apartment, intrigued. My heart was pounding and I didn't even know why. I set the box on the living room table and stood there, frozen, staring at it, for long minutes, as if, somehow, I already knew that my life would never be the same after opening it. And then, with trembling hands, I untied the ribbon, lifted the lid, and there it was, lying on a white blanket, a reborn baby. The skin looked real, the eyelashes so delicate, the scent of baby powder mixed with something metallic, almost chemical. I couldn't breathe. For a second, I thought it had breathed, but no, that couldn't be. I picked up the card again looking for some explanation, but there was only that phrase, "So you'll never feel alone again." I sighed, trying to convince myself it was just a strange gift, a prank, or maybe an anonymous act of kindness. But deep down, a part of me knew that this was the beginning of something that I would no longer be able to control. And that night, I decided it would sleep in my room, just so I wouldn't feel so alone. And that's how it all began. That night, after much hesitation, I brought the baby into my bedroom. I carefully placed it on the armchair right next to the bed as if it were a real child. For some reason I couldn't even explain to myself. I just couldn't leave it in the living room. I turned off the lights, lay down and tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop looking at it. The way the eyes even closed looked so alive. The texture of the skin, the artificial sheen, the slightly open mouth as if about to cry. I reached out and touched its cheek. Cold. Much colder than I expected. A shiver ran down my spine. I sighed, trying to shake off the discomfort, and pulled the blanket up to my neck. I closed my eyes, but seconds later I opened them again. It was in the same position. Of course, it was just a doll. Just a doll. I turned onto my side, determined not to feed that strange feeling. But suddenly, a strong, sweet scent filled the room. It was baby powder, but with something else. Something metallic, chemical. A smell I didn't remember noticing when I took it out of the box. I sat up in bed, staring at it, motionless, perfect, silent. I swallowed hard and told myself I was just overreacting. After all, I had been alone for so long, that even a doll felt more present than any human who had ever been here. I forced myself to lie down again, and this time, I managed to fall asleep. Or at least, I thought I did, because in the middle of the night, I had the impression I heard a whisper, or maybe a sigh. I turned to the side, but the baby was still there, exactly where I had left it. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, and for the first time since I received that gift, I felt strangely that I was no longer alone. The following days passed, strangely silent. I started creating a routine with him. Yes, with him. Because in no time I wasn't calling it that or the doll anymore. It was him, my baby. I gave him a name, but I'd rather not say it. Not yet. I dressed him in new clothes I bought just for him, and I carefully arranged his little body in the makeshift crib next to my bed. Yes, I improvised a crib, with soft sheets, pillows, as if somehow he actually needed comfort. And every night, before going to sleep, I would carefully tuck him in, kiss his cold forehead, and whisper, "Good night, my love." But that's when things started to change. On the third night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a faint sound, like something moving, like the fabric of a blanket being pulled. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and immediately looked at the armchair where he always stayed during the day. But he wasn't there. I looked at the makeshift crib, and there he was, of course, untouched. I sighed, trying to calm myself. It must have been some noise from the building or just my imagination. I lay down again, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next night, the same thing. This time, the sound seemed closer, like something softly scratching at the fabric of the armchair. On impulse, I turned on the bedside lamp. The room empty, yet motionless, with that lifeless stare, but at the same time, so aware. I no longer knew if I was really hearing something, or if my mind was starting to play tricks on me. But what scared me wasn't just the sounds, it was the way that every night without fail, at exactly 3 in the morning, I woke up, always at the same time, as if someone or something was calling me, and with each night, the feeling of not being alone became more intense, more unsettling. That night I woke up startled, my heart racing. I looked at the clock on the nightstand and there it was, 3 o'clock sharp. I sighed, trying to calm myself, but that's when I heard a cry, low, muffled, coming from the corner of the room. My whole body tensed. The sound was clear. There was no doubt. It was the cry of a baby, and it was coming from the makeshift crib right next to my bed. I got up slowly, not exactly sure what to do. I approached, and there he was, motionless, with that serene expression, eyes closed as always. And yet, the crying continued, insistent, almost pleading. I looked around, searching for some device, maybe a hidden speaker or even my own phone playing some alarm. But there was nothing. The room was silent, except for that cry that seemed to echo from within him. For a moment I felt ridiculous. Maybe I was dreaming, or going insane. But the sound was there. Real, almost tangible, filling every corner of the room and making me shiver. I touched his hand, cold as always, and the crying stopped immediately. The silence that followed was even worse. I went back to bed, curled up under the covers, my eyes fixed on the crib. I couldn't sleep again that night. All I could think about was that, how was it possible? How could a reborn baby cry? The next day, I tried to rationalize it, looking for logical explanations. Maybe it was some noise from the building, a neighbor. But no, I knew. I felt it. It was coming from him. And from that night on, the crying started to repeat, always at 3 in the morning. Like a dark ritual, a routine I couldn't break. Each night, the sound seemed louder, more desperate, as if begging for something. And I no longer knew if I felt fear or pity. After several more nights waking up to that inexplicable crying, I could no longer pretend it was just in my head. I spent the entire day restless, pacing back and forth through the apartment, until I finally decided to look for answers. I opened my laptop and started researching everything about reborn babies. Until then, I only knew about them superficially. I knew they were hyper-realistic dolls, made for therapy or collections, but nothing more. I typed, "Reborn baby makes noise by itself." And then, to my surprise, stories started popping up. People sharing similar experiences, strange noises, dolls that seemed to change positions, some even claimed their eyes blinked on their own. I read each account with a mix of disbelief and growing fear. One story struck me deeply. A woman said that after her son died, she bought a reborn baby and, over time, started hearing him cry in the middle of the night, until she could no longer tell what was real and what was imagination. I slammed the laptop shut, trying to push away those absurd thoughts. I hadn't lost a child. I didn't have any hidden trauma. Or did I? I looked at the makeshift crib in the corner of the room. He was there, motionless, silent as always, as if he had never made a sound. But I knew he had. I heard it. I felt it. I took a deep breath and decided it was just a doll. Nothing more. Maybe my subconscious was projecting things as I'd read in some articles. Some kind of emotional transference. But then, at that very moment, I felt it again. A faint scent of baby powder, sweet, familiar, filling the room even with the windows closed. And once again, that unmistakable sensation that I was not alone. I closed the bedroom door as if that could contain something I couldn't even name, and locked myself in the living room. That night, I decided he wouldn't sleep in the bedroom with me. I left the reborn baby on the armchair in the living room, with a blanket that always covered him, and went to bed, trying to convince myself that I would finally have a peaceful night. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. If this story is already giving you chills, comment "scared" down below. We want to know who's following along and who will have the courage to make it to the end. After that night, I tried to distance myself from him. I tried to keep some space, but it was useless. The next morning, as soon as I woke up, the first thing I did was go to the living room, pick up the baby in my arms, and bring him back to the bedroom as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I realized that, little by little, I was creating a routine around him. I started buying more clothes, diapers, bottles, even specific furniture. I had a real crib built, solid wood with white bars and delicate details. I chose a dresser to organize the clothes, and without even noticing, I transformed the old office into a complete nursery. I realized I wasn't leaving the house anymore. Dinner invitations, meetups, events, I declined them all one by one. I didn't want to see anyone anymore. My friends tried to insist, some sent worried messages, others called, but I simply didn't answer. The truth is, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I spent hours arranging his clothes, picking out new accessories online, setting up little scenes for photos, as if I truly were a proud mother. I posted a few pictures, but I never showed his face. It was something just ours. I even started talking to him. At first, it was just innocent monologues, venting silly things about my day, but later the conversations became long, intimate, filled with emotions I didn't even know I had been holding onto all these years. Sometimes I caught myself rocking the crib, singing a lullaby with tears in my eyes, without even realizing what I was doing. My days began to revolve completely around him. The time to get up, to give him a bath, even though I knew he didn't need one, to change his clothes, to put him to sleep. And of course, every night, at 3 in the morning, that persistent cry, punctual, that I no longer tried to understand. I just accepted. It was as if he were truly alive, and depended on me. And I could no longer imagine my life without him. That night, everything seemed normal, or at least as normal as it could be, considering the situation I was in. I placed him in the crib, carefully adjusted the blanket, and as always, wished him good night before turning off the lights. I lay down, but sleep didn't come. I stayed there, eyes open, listening to the heavy stillness of the silent apartment. Until, as expected, the crying began. Right on time at 3 in the morning. But this time it wasn't just the sound. When I got up, almost automatically by now, and approached the crib, I noticed something different. His head wasn't in the same position. The night before, I had left his face slightly turned to the side as I always did. But now, it was completely facing me. I stopped, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it filled the entire room. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but there it was, clear as day. The crying continued, soft, and it felt even closer, more real, as if it were being produced right there in front of me. I leaned in, touched his little body, cold as always. But in that instant, I swear I felt a slight tremor, as if he had just moved. I took 2 steps back, unable to look away. The crying stopped, suddenly, as quickly as it had started. The room plunged into a suffocating silence. The only thing I could hear was my own heart racing and my uneven breathing. I stood there, frozen, for long minutes, unable to move, trying to rationalize, searching for some plausible explanation. Maybe I had, without realizing, shifted his head the night before. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the pillow had adjusted itself. But deep down I knew. From that night on, I stopped leaving him alone. I began taking him with me to every room in the house, as if, somehow, that could prevent whatever it was that was happening. And even without saying it out loud, I already knew that this thing, that until then I called my baby, was not just a doll. After that night, I realized I could no longer deal with this on my own. The fear was no longer just a passing sensation. It had become a constant, suffocating presence that followed me with every step through the house. I spent days avoiding looking directly at him, but at the same time I couldn't bear to keep him out of my reach. It was as if he knew. As if he sensed every move I made, every failed attempt to regain control over my own life. That's when I decided to seek help. I called a therapist that a friend had recommended some time ago. I scheduled the appointment, though I felt ashamed to even say what was happening. When I arrived at the office, I sat in the chair and stayed silent for a few minutes, not knowing how to start. The therapist just looked at me with that calm, patient expression. Until, in a sudden impulse, I broke down. I know it sounds crazy, but the baby I have at home cries every night at 3 in the morning. She frowned slightly but remained composed. She asked about my routine, my social life, about past traumas. And of course she spoke about loneliness, about how sometimes the mind creates imaginary bonds to fill voids we can't face. I left feeling like I had said everything, but resolved nothing. That same week, I decided to look for a priest. I entered a church in a distant neighborhood, like someone seeking shelter from a storm. The priest received me in the sacristy, and when I told him, I couldn't stop my voice from trembling. "There's something about that baby." He made the sign of the cross and asked if I wanted him to come to my house to bless the place. I hesitated. Part of me wanted that, another part was afraid. In the end, I agreed. 2 days later, he came. He entered, blessed the rooms, said some prayers, sprinkled holy water, and for a moment I believed it might work. But that very night, the crying returned. Exactly at 3 in the morning, stronger, more anguished, closer. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't something that could be solved with prayers. It was something that was inside me or inside him. And maybe there was no turning back. That night, after the priest's blessing, I fell asleep exhausted, thinking, or at least wanting to believe, that I would finally have some peace. But it was precisely that night that I had the strangest and most disturbing dream of my entire life. In the dream, I was in the bedroom, completely dark, except for a faint light coming from the crib. I approached hesitantly, and when I looked, there he was, but this time, with his eyes open. And he was crying. Not the cry I heard every night, but a real cry, deep, desperate. And then he spoke. With a weak, trembling voice, almost a whisper. "Don't leave me alone." I stepped back, frightened, but he stretched out his little arms toward me, pleading, repeating, "Don't leave me, don't leave me." I woke up with a jolt, my heart racing, my face covered in cold sweat. It took me a few seconds to realize where I was. I looked at the clock. It was 3 in the morning, again. And then, my eyes automatically turned to the crib. But he wasn't there. I jumped out of bed, looked around, but the crib was empty. My heart nearly stopped. I searched the room, pulled the armchair, opened the closet. Nothing. Until, as I turned toward the center of the room, I saw him. Sitting on the floor, right in the middle of the rug, with his arms outstretched. Exactly like in the dream. For a moment, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind tried to find any logical explanation, but my body simply wouldn't respond. The silence was absolute. Just the two of us, there, in that absurd scene. I slowly approached, knelt down, and without even realizing it, I hugged him, holding him tightly against my chest as if that was the only thing that made sense. I stayed there for minutes, maybe hours, until the sun began to rise and I, exhausted, sat on the floor with him in my arms, no longer knowing what was a dream and what was real. In that moment, I was certain. I was losing control. After that night, I knew I had to do something. I could no longer rely solely on my memory or my sensations. I needed proof. The next morning, I bought a baby monitor with a camera. I chose the most advanced model with night vision, motion detection, and high-quality audio. I spent hours setting it up, positioning it strategically in front of the crib. I ran some tests, adjusted the focus, and that night, for the first time, I went to bed with the intention of observing, recording, of understanding. It took me a while to fall asleep, too anxious about the idea that, by morning, I might finally have some explanation. And, as always, I woke up at 3 in the morning, to the sound of crying. But this time I didn't get up. I stayed there, motionless, listening, as the crying echoed through the room, stronger, more anguished, until it stopped, just like it always did. I waited for dawn to check the footage. Early in the morning, I sat in front of my laptop and opened the night's recording. For long minutes, nothing but silence and darkness. Me tossing and turning in bed, restless, until at 3 a.m. The camera captured the sound of the crying. My entire body shivered. But the worst was yet to come. With the motion sensor activated, the video automatically zoomed in on the crib. And then, I saw it. Clearly, his head, moving. Not a subtle shift caused by a slipping pillow, no. He turned his head, slowly, until it was fully facing the camera. And in that moment, his eyes opened. For a brief second, so quick I had to replay the video several times to believe it, his eyes opened and stared directly at the lens as if he knew he was being watched. My hand trembled as I paused and replayed the footage, desperately trying to find a rational explanation. I couldn't. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. That day, for the first time, I seriously considered getting rid of him, throwing him away, donating him, burning him, anything. But I couldn't. The attachment, or the fear, or both, kept me trapped. And even after seeing that footage that night, I placed him as always in the crib, adjusted the blanket, and whispered, "Good night," as if everything was absolutely normal. After that recording, I thought nothing else could scare me, but I was wrong. The following night, I tried everything to fall asleep early, kept the lights on, distracted my mind with movies and books. Anything to not think about him, to not hear that crying at 3 in the morning. Around 2, I finally fell asleep, exhausted. And then the phone rang. In the middle of the night, the shrill sound sliced through the silence of the house like a blade. I looked at the screen, groggy, unknown number. I hesitated, but I answered. On the other end, silence. I thought about hanging up, but suddenly, a voice, soft, childlike, whispered, "Mommy?" The blood froze in my veins. I remained silent, paralyzed, unable to breathe as that fragile yet disturbing voice repeated, "Mommy, Mommy?" I slammed the phone down, threw it onto the bed, my whole body shaking. But before I could even get up, it rang again. A known number, again. I let it ring, but the sound seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if it wanted to invade the house, to force me to answer. Finally, when it stopped, I curled up in bed, hugging my knees, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door, waiting, fearing, imagining the worst. And then, as always, the crying began. Right on time. At 3 in the morning. That same sequence that seemed to have become my new routine. The crying, the fear, the chills, the suffocating silence. Only this time the phone remained on. And on the screen, a message. "I'm here." I shut my eyes tightly, trying to convince myself it was just a prank, a mistake, some absurd coincidence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. After that night, something inside me broke. I could no longer distinguish what was real from what was born of my fear, my imagination, or perhaps something I simply couldn't explain. I spent most of my days locked inside the house, the windows shut, the lights always on, as if that could keep away whatever it was I felt getting closer, more present, with each passing day. I started talking to him all the time. Not just the usual good morning or good night. No, entire conversations. Long ones. About what I was going to cook, about the movies I had watched, about how I was feeling, about everything. I spoke as if he could hear, as if he could understand. I fed him with a bottle, even knowing he didn't need it. Changed his clothes several times a day. Adjusted the crib, rocked him, sang lullabies. And he looked at me. Or, at least that's what I felt. That inert, plastic expression gradually became alive in my eyes. It didn't matter how many times I told myself he was just a doll. I could no longer believe it. The few friends and family who still tried to reach out gave up. Some knocked on the door, insisted, sent messages, until one day they simply stopped. And I felt relieved. Because at that point no one else understood. Only him. Just the two of us. The nights became even more suffocating. The crying at 3 a.m. now sounded almost like a calling, a need, as if he were begging for my presence. And I always responded. I would get up, hold him in my arms, rock him gently and say, "Shoo, Mommy's here. I'm here." And then, the crying would stop. In those silent early mornings, sitting in the armchair with him in my arms, I felt whole, complete. But at the same time, I knew I was completely losing control. That this situation was no longer just about a reborn baby. It was about me. About something much deeper and much darker. That night, something inside me finally gave in. After weeks living in that suffocating cycle of isolation, fear, and dependence, I decided I had to put an end to it all. I couldn't go on like this. I spent the entire day walking around the house, looking at him, sitting in the crib, with that serene, motionless expression, as always. But now, even that silence seemed to provoke me. When the clock struck 11 at night, I began packing everything up. I took the box he had arrived in, cleaned it, lined it with the same white blanket that had wrapped him the day I opened that gift. The one I already knew I should never have opened. I placed him inside carefully as if he were a real baby. I adjusted the position of his arms, straightened his head, and slowly closed the lid, feeling my heart tighten as if I were abandoning something or someone. I carried the box down to the basement, the only place in the house I rarely entered. I opened the door, descended the creaking stairs, and in a dark corner, pushed the box all the way to the back against the cold wall. I stood there staring at it for long minutes, waiting maybe to hear some sound, a cry, anything, but nothing. I went back upstairs, locking the basement door firmly. I lay in bed for the first time in weeks with the feeling that maybe I had done it. Maybe finally that night I would sleep in peace. But, of course, it wasn't like that. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, the crying started. faint, muffled, but perfectly audible. My whole body froze. I shut my eyes tightly, curled up, trying to ignore it, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was just my mind, betraying me once again. But the crying didn't stop. On the contrary, it seemed more and more desperate, closer, more suffocating. I got up, hesitantly walked to the bedroom door, and stood there listening. The sound was coming from the basement, exactly from where I had left the box. In that moment, I realized that no matter what I did, he would always find a way to call me, and I would always hear him. The next morning, I woke up with the sensation that I hadn't slept at all. My head throbbed, my body felt heavy, and the crying still seemed to echo through the corners of the house, even though at that moment, everything was silent. I slowly went down to the basement without even thinking, as if drawn by a force I could no longer resist. The door was locked, exactly as I had left it. But when I turned the key and pushed, I felt the cold, dense air rush into the hallway. I descended the creaking steps, my heart pounding faster with each one. And then, I stopped. The box was open. The lid lying to the side, the blanket crumpled. And he was sitting right in the middle of the basement on the concrete floor, arms outstretched, as he always did, inviting me or challenging me. I no longer knew. I stood there, staring at that absurd scene until, without realizing it, my feet began to move, slowly, hesitantly, until I knelt in front of him. I reached out, touched his cold cheeks, and hugged him. In that moment, the tears started to fall, silent, warm, mixing with the damp cold of the basement. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just held him tightly, feeling my chest both tighten and, somehow, release. We stayed there for a time I couldn't measure, minutes, hours, maybe the whole day. Until I stood up, picked him up in my arms, and brought him back home. I arranged the crib again, carefully adjusted the blanket, and placed him there just as I always did. I sat in the armchair beside him, looking at him, listening to the silence, and, for the first time in a long while, he didn't cry. The room remained quiet, calm, almost serene. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and, for the first time, thought that maybe it was all over. But then, from somewhere in the house, maybe from the basement, or maybe just from my own mind, the faint whisper, "Mommy," and I smiled, not knowing if this was a new beginning or simply the end. Nowadays the days are quieter. I wake up early, make coffee, tidy up the house, and spend most of my time by his side. We continue with our routine, just as it has always been. I change his clothes, arrange the crib, spend hours rocking, even though I know he doesn't need it. But I do it because I need to. People don't call me anymore, they don't send messages. I guess they understood that here, I'm fine. Or, at least that they no longer want to get involved. And I have accepted it. Now it's just him and me. The crying never happened again. Since that night in the basement, he's remained quiet, serene, with that calm expression, almost satisfied. But curiously, I've also never been able to sleep again. The nights are long. I sit in the armchair looking at the crib, listening to the silence. But sometimes, deep down, when the clock strikes 3 in the morning, I still think I hear a faint cry. Soft, muffled, distant. Or maybe it's just my mind reminding me that he will always be here. Always. And every time that happens, I get up from the armchair, walk over to the crib, carefully adjust the blanket, and whisper, "Mommy's here." And then I sit back down, and I wait, as always, as forever. If you're enjoying this story, leave a like. It really helps the channel keep bringing more real cases and gripping narratives. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell because every week we share new stories that will mess with your mind. And tell us in the comments, do you believe that objects can carry something beyond what we see? Share this video with someone who loves suspenseful stories and psychological horror.